Welcome to your Get That Nugget for GCSE English Language. Today we'll be concentrating on giving you a framework to answer Paper 1 Question 5, the writing question. This session is to complement your lessons with your teachers and not to replace them in any way. So in the previous cohort nugget, we looked at what the features of this question 5 is about and the idea that we need to write descriptively, creatively with the question that they are giving us. I want to start with just a recap of the assessment objectives. So the whole idea of this question, the main part, the 24-mark part, is to communicate clearly and effectively and imaginatively, and we are able to select and adapt our tone, style and register for different forms, purposes and audiences. And we need to also show that we can organise information and ideas using structural and grammatical features to support coherence and cohesion of text. So for question 5, we know it's a 40-mark question. As I've just explained, for the 24 marks, that's the content and organisation. For the 16 marks, that's our spelling, our grammar, our sentence uses. For the purposes of our nuggets, we're going to look at how to organise our text and try and maximise the amount of marks that we can possibly get, in particular for that assessment objective 5 for the 24 marker. If you remember previously, I showed you a structure on how to plan and then ultimately write this question, and it's a structure that is really effective to use. It's not a complicated one and it's not one that has a lot of parts to it. There are 6 main parts and then there's an opening and a closing line. And the purpose of this nugget, we're going to plan a picture or an image, together using this structure. And then we'll look at how we can maximise that planning time. Now, obviously in the exam, you are not going to have a huge amount of time to plan for this image or the image they give you. So it's really important over the next few months that you spend time in your revision time and your planning time to plan those questions. And the more you plan, the quicker you'll be when it comes to the actual exam. And you already will have this structure quite clearly in your mind so that when you are in that exam you can use as much of that time to write and still have time to plan, but more about the writing. In the exam you want to spend about 45 minutes on this question, and I would recommend about 10 minutes planning time, around 30 minutes writing, and then that leaves you with about 5 minutes just to read through what you have written and then edit anything that you may need to edit. So planning time is important, but we really want to get it down to that 10-minute window. Obviously, the planning that I'm going to show you today in this nugget, it's going to take a lot longer than 10 minutes, but I'm going to show you the basics and then you can go away using this structure and plan a variety of different images. So our planning sheet is essentially a grid, as I said. The more we can get in the plan, the better our writing is going to be. And if we use these sections, we are covering everything that we possibly would need to cover. Firstly, we need an image. So these nuggets are based on the image questions. I've gone for quite a generic image. We've gone for something where there's a person and there's a bit of setting as well. Now, there are 2 approaches that you can do to a question like this, and I did run through this in previous nuggets for this question. The first one is that you section off parts of the image that you would like to write about. So you simply just go through and pick 3 things. So it could be for this image, you're going to have a paragraph about this person. It could be you're going to write about a mountain. It could be you're going to write about the sky. It doesn't really matter which you pick or what areas that you pick. That's down to your preference and what you would like to write about. The second version that you can do for this is you don't have to have different sections of the text. You can just use the image and then come back to different sections of the text at a later point. It is down to your personal preference and what you feel most comfortable with. So using the image, we're going to use the planning sheet to plan a response to our image. Now, what I would do, and I recommend you do, is you leave the opening and closing line till last. I find that if you plan it that way, then you can find something very specific to your piece of writing and therefore very effective. So I would leave that till last. I also find that lots of people struggle to find an opening line. and they will come up with a stumbling block and spend quite a long time trying to plan one sentence, but then they don't have time to do this. So I would do these sections first, these 5 sections, and then you can do the other 2 pieces. Okay, so with that in mind, let's really think about how we are going to plan our response to this question. So you might have noticed that on the original planning sheet there were 6 pieces to look at. Now this would be if we're aiming for the top grades. So if you're not comfortable with having a 6th paragraph and linking to the beginning, then you are more than welcome just to do the 5 sections and then have a sentence at the end. For the purposes of our video, of this nugget, we are going to plan the 6 sections because we really want a secure and well thought out response to the writing section, and we're trying to get a secure response. So to get that secure response, we are going to need to have that 6th paragraph. Again, this is down to your personal preference. If you're someone who struggles to plan things with images, then you can take out one of these, most likely paragraph 6, because you can use that sentence at the end. But for the purpose of this nugget, as I said, we are going to use all of them. So our first paragraph is you're always going to start after your initial 1-word paragraph or 1-word sentence. You're always going to start with the current scene. So this is going to be anything to do with the image that they have given you. Now our current scene in this image is obviously a lake. So we can see a lake, we can see mountains, we can see some sort of jetty or boardwalk, which is wooden. Things we can also see in terms of weather. So the sky is grey, it's cloudy, it's miserable. We can also see in the distance there may be some blue sky. And this is essentially how you plan. We're not looking in the planning sheet to have lots and lots of long sentences. What we're looking for is the general idea that you are going to want to use for your response, because all the writing part and turning those into magnificent sentences is going to come later when you use this to turn it into writing. As I said at the beginning of the nugget, this is not something that you can do in that exam time, but the process of this and the planning of this is something that's really good to practice before going into an exam, so you know where your mind needs to work through in order to be successful. Okay, paragraph 2. This is a very, very good paragraph for your writing. Not only does it mean that you are then using structural features in your own writing, and from paper 1 question 3 we know that structural techniques are super effective, it also is something that adds depth to your writing. So it's something that keeps your reader, in this case the examiner, engaged, and we want something in there that's a contrast. So we've said that at the lake it's quite grey, it's quite cloudy, it's quite miserable. We're not quite sure why the person's there yet, but he looks quite down. So with this, in this context, our flashback is probably going to be something that's a bit more sunnier. So it's sunny, it's bright, maybe something that's filled with hope or happiness. Perhaps something that happened when they were a child, depending on if your person's going to be an adult or not. Maybe they had visited that place when they were younger, so visited the same place. That's quite an effective technique to use, because you're using the same image. You haven't had to think of anything different, but you're flipping what you've already talked about into a positive. And if we can keep this as a positive memory, you've got a really good contrast for the rest of your writing. Paragraph 3, something happens. So paragraph 3 is actually a very short paragraph. It's something that brings our character back to the present. So what we're going to need to do is it needs to be some form of noise or something that shocks them out of their memory. So for our purposes, we know we're at a lake, we know there's probably some nature around, we've got mountains, who knows what's behind him. So let's do a noise of a bird. And that noise will bring us out of whatever flashback we were thinking of. Very, very short, and we'll look into more depth about how we turn them into sentences later. Paragraph 4, back to the present. So we are back in the same setting. So we're back at the lake. And here what we want is we want lots of thoughts and feelings. Thinking about areas like, why are they there? Okay, how have they got there? So is there a reason why they're there? Obviously that's your why. But has it been a journey to get there? Are they there for a particular reason? How have they got there in terms of their life? Is this an end point? Is this a point where they're thinking about something different? Are they waiting for someone? Have they lost someone? Are they about to lose someone? It could be anything. That's down to you and your imagination. But if we can go to the thoughts and feelings, we're back in the present. We want a little bit more setting here as well. And that can link back to our first paragraph, our current scene. Paragraph 5, this is where we need to zoom in on a key detail. And this is where you have to decide what process you would have started this image with. If you were one of the people who would like to section off the separate areas of the text, you could zoom in on a piece of the setting. I recommend this because I think it's quite an imaginative and creative way of doing this. So if we're looking at setting, I think in our image here, let's focus on the lake. Our character seems to be very focused on this lake, and in particular towards the back of it, or the far end, the far side. So you want lots and lots of detailed description of this. And you're zooming in just on the lake. You're not talking about anything else, you're just zooming in on that lake. Paragraph 6, this is the one where we get the extra push for our secure response. To link back to the beginning, we want to go back to the current scene. So we're going to go back to setting, and that's all of the setting. You may want to have a few more feelings and emotions in here as well. And we want some link to the beginning. We're not going to write the exact same things, but we want the same sort of process in our final paragraph, just to make sure we've got that cyclical structure. Remember, we're looking for a cyclical structure where the beginning is very similar to the end. In the last paragraph, it's your final opportunity just before the last sentence to really leave some emotion with your reader, with your examiner. So it may be, has there been a change to the thoughts and feelings of the person in the picture? Has there been a change to any of the weather? Has the weather changed? Has the setting changed? We know we're in the same place, but is there anything that could possibly change or alter from the beginning? Once you've got your basic plan, then you can go back through and start thinking about language features and techniques, and you can add them into the plan, which is what we'll do in the following nugget. The opening line and closing line. My advice would be keep it as simple as possible, but this is also an opportunity for you to use a specific vocabulary choice that you like, or that you know how to spell really well and you think is really effective. I always think things like isolated work well. I always think decayed always works quite well. Abysmal is also quite a good word, but again, it can be any word that you'd like, and obviously it needs to fit in with your image. I also probably wouldn't use one word. I would probably keep it a maximum of 4 words. And what is very effective is in your closing line, because you want it to be either the same, which is super effective, or similar, you want to use the same words. Now, it could be that you started and ended with a rhetorical question and some of the words change around slightly, or there is an altered word in there. But keep that, again, keeps that cyclical structure. But that's how you plan an image. Use this part, these parts here, the 6-part process. I've only done very basic notes. You would obviously do much more than I've done, but for the purposes of the nugget, I can't go into a lot of detail in our time frame. But this structure, make sure you take a note of this and make sure you plan as much as possible each section. The more detailed your plan is, the better your writing is going to be. What I would suggest you do is you then take this image, the image that we've been using, and start planning, just like I've shown you, a response to that image. The more detail, the better. And I'm sure if your teacher would like to see your planning, they'd be really happy to have a look at it for you. But please remember, the more detail in these boxes, the better.